All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Hoplite channel. It is October 10th, 2023, and it seems like the world is on fire. But you are here to see this video, The House Always Wins, right? So, I feel like I may have jinxed myself with the last episode I did for the channel, Jingo All the Way, in which I defined the U.S. foreign policy as being just pure, unadulterated jingoism. And, well, I hate to toot my own horn once again, but I think that episode proved to be prescient. That's exactly what's going on. And I wanted to wait a few days. It's the 10th, I said, and this whole war in Israel now, between Palestine and Israel, it seems like there is no end in sight for the conflict that is now going to consume the world as the American empire wanes, as the world order that was once held together by U.S. supremacy is now disintegrating, and this multipolar world order is taking over. And this is, I guess, just the growing pains stage of a multipolar world becoming the new norm versus a unipolar world that we all grew up in. This is probably what the world was like decades and decades ago without two superpowers vying for control and then one superpower eventually emerging victorious. This is multipolar. And as a result, these multipolar struggles throughout the world will be ongoing because there will be no stopping anyone from waging war against their neighbor. There will be no stopping people from trying to take what's good for the taking. And that's exactly what I think is going on in Israel right now. And I use the phrase, the house always wins, because if you're familiar with that phrase, it's in reference to obviously gambling and going to the casino. We see places like Las Vegas or Monte Carlo, and those places are rich and lavish because most people go there thinking that they're going to win. But in reality, it's the house, it's the casino that always wins. And the casino is willing to let one of you win, provided that 1,000 of you lose. Because if you do the math, the casino at the end of every single day takes profits. And as long as that game stays, the casino stays open. If the house is always winning, one or two or three winners can partake in the profits as well. But the casino sees to it that most people walk away losers. And right now, the United States, because its power is waning, it is now going to have to manage its empire in decline. And all these individual multipolar powers are going to look to run their regions as a casino would. As in, now that the United States no longer controls or sets the tone for the world, this is our shop and we're going to run it as we see fit. And I think that's what's going on right now in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I'm going to explain why I think that. Again, a lot of people want to say that, oh no, this is just a terrorist attack like any other. But Israel right now is leveling parts of Gaza, a location that I read an article is about the size of Detroit, and these people cannot get out because to the west is the Mediterranean Sea, and to the east is Israel, to the north is Israel, and they have one little corridor to Egypt, and right now that's being blockaded by the IDF forces. They're cutting off electricity, they're cutting off gas, they're cutting off water, they're cutting off sewage. It's got to be absolute hell right now to be in the Gaza Strip. And the majority of people in that Gaza Strip area are civilians, men, women, and children. They're not terrorists, they're not combatants. And this conflict now is being done for several reasons. And chief among them, I believe, is that the United States realizes that it can no longer keep funding the war in Ukraine, and that war will eventually be lost. So instead of suing for peace or intervening on Ukraine's behalf, they're going to help start a war in Israel between Palestinians and Israelis, or possibly Hezbollah or Syria. And that war, they have a far greater chance of winning than against a world power like Russia. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's go back to the start as to how this war possibly got started and how it could have been in the making for years, and we just didn't know it yet. So in the opening, you saw that Bibi Netanyahu was tripping over himself to congratulate President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris for winning the greatest victory in U.S. politics and getting 81 million legitimate votes, which is unprecedented, obviously. But then we see that there's also intel coming out that there are images of these Hamas fighters in Israel that are possibly using equipment that was left behind by the Biden administration in Afghanistan. So how do we explain all this? Well, we go back to the beginning, right? As where this may have all started. August 30th, 21, I remember it vividly, the hasty and chaotic withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. We lost 13 of our troops there, and over 100 Afghans died in the exfiltration from Kabul airport. Not from Bagram Air Base, mind you, that we controlled. We decided to exfiltrate from Kabul airport, unsecured, uncontrolled. ISIS-K, which was labeled literally that week, the offshoot of ISIS. Where did they come from? Who knows? They launched the homicide bomber, and that's where we lost the 13 military personnel at the Abbey Gate. By the way, we had good intelligence that was telling us that this attack was imminent. Again, we ignored it either out of incompetence or arrogance, and those 13 kids unfortunately died for no good reason. But to make matters worse, the insult to the injury was that we left $7 billion in munitions and weapons, aircraft, vehicles, and equipment completely free for the taking. Now, at the time, I was like everybody else. I just thought this was so incompetent, so stupid that it could only be described as incompetence, right? I could not, my outrage wouldn't let me see beyond this, that why would we just leave this $7 billion of equipment there for our quote unquote enemies, the Taliban, to take? Well, we'll find out why, possibly. But the Afghan forces that U.S. Military had been training for years collapsed immediately, and the Taliban retook Afghanistan in a matter of months. They now control 100% of the country, and for all we know, ISIS, ISIS-K, or whatever name they're going by now, is still operating within Afghanistan, possibly alongside the Taliban. Let's jump now to 2022. February 24th, we see that Russia invaded Ukraine, and currently that war is still going on. The U.S., as of October 2023, has invested $113 billion into Ukraine on their behalf for the war effort. So we've been waging a war against Russia using Ukraine as the proxy, right? Despite that investment, Russia holds now approximately 25% of the territory in Ukraine, and there's been 500,000 casualties on both sides, although the majority of those 500,000 have been Ukrainians, right? So here's what I think is going on, is that the United States realizes that, well, we're not going to ask the Ukrainian government to sue for peace. We're not going to get the United States involved in the war itself, because that could trigger World War III. So how do we get ourselves out of this proxy war with Ukraine that appears to be lost? Well, we'll just help start a new war somewhere else, and the media will turn all of their cameras to that conflict, and this will just be forgotten. We're going into an election year next year, so we don't want that bad press. So we'll just wipe our hands of the Russia-Ukraine war. Good luck to them, but now we'll move the conflict somewhere else. And I think there was one event in the last 2 weeks that triggered this. On October 3rd, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy was removed by his own party. And that's the first time that's ever happened in U.S. history, which is kind of hard to believe, right? That a House Speaker has never been voted out by his own party in the last 200 some odd years of U.S. Government history. That's never happened. But why was McCarthy booted? Well, his party found out that to avoid the government shutdown, he cut a backroom deal with the Biden administration to keep funding the war in Ukraine. And hardline Republicans, rightly so, in the House said, if you do that, we will remove you. We do not want this government kept open and the American people on the hook for more billions to go to Ukraine. We know that war is being fought as a proxy. We know there's money laundering operations going on in that country, and Ukrainian men are dying by the thousands every day. McCarthy rolled the dice, did the backroom deal, and his party removed him. So what does that mean? McCarthy is out. There's going to be a new House Speaker, maybe in the next week or two, hopefully sooner than that, but they will vote a new House Speaker, and that House Speaker knows that if they try to arrange for funding for the war in Ukraine, he will be bounced out just like Kevin was. So that has signaled now to the military-industrial complex in D.C. and the government officials who are using it as a money laundering operation, this merry-go-round is about to break down. There will no longer be funding for the Ukraine war by the U.S. taxpayer. But what do, right? We have all of these government contractors building arms, building munitions that are already pre-ordered. Well, what happens miraculously after Kevin McCarthy is removed? 4 days later, we see Hamas launches a surprise attack against Israel. Hundreds were killed, dozens have been captured. I think right now there's footage of just these poor people being executed because Israel has declared total war now against Palestine and is hammering the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu went on the record and said it's official, Israel's at war. First time they've formally declared war in decades. And the U.S. has sent carriers, or sent the U.S. SS Gerald Ford warships along with jets in support of our ally Israel, that they're going to park off the coast in the Mediterranean. So here we go again, right? The Ukraine war is not going the way we thought it would. Russia's economy is not collapsing. Their economy is actually doing better, I think, than when the war started. And our investment there is not bearing fruit. So instead of trying to reach a resolution for this conflict, we see that Hamas launches a surprise attack. And I had to look this place up, right? It's Re'im, Israel. It's in the middle of nowhere. And there was this music festival going on there. And we saw there's images like the beginning, if you've seen the original movie, Red Dawn, there are these Hamas fighters coming over the fence, the wall that separates the Gaza Strip from Israel in these paragliders, like things you would rent and go for a ride on if you're on vacation at some island destination. And they flew over in these paragliders with their kit and their assault rifles, and they just started mowing down these concert goers who were probably dropping acid and looking to hook up with their buddies. And they figured, what could possibly happen to us? Like we're in safe territory. We're in Israel. We're in the middle of nowhere. Well, they found out that this was the soft target that Hamas had chosen. But where's Mossad? Where's the IDF? Why wasn't this concert, which had hundreds of people, properly secured? Where were the Israeli police even? And you're telling me that Mossad and IDF didn't have any assets within the Gaza Strip that could, pick up a phone and say, hey, there's a bunch of guys inside the Gaza Strip here. They're gearing up for war and they're loading onto paragliders. I think they're going to try to get over the wall and make an attack. Where was that? So that was my first big clue, is that there's no way that they had such an intel collapse as to allow that to happen. And then we saw Hamas from other parts launching rockets out from the Gaza side and possibly coming from the West Bank. This attack was so sudden and deadly that Israel has lost more people in one day probably than the last 3 or 4 or 5 years combined to conflict with Palestine and its I guess organized militia force Hamas. But they don't have a representative government. They don't have a standing army. Hamas is basically all they have. So now Netanyahu, who ironically a year or so ago was facing corruption charges, he tried to pack the Supreme Court in Israel for his favor. Like politically, Bibi has always found a way to stay in power. And normally it comes from some threat of war or some terrorist attack happening, and miraculously he gets to stay because he's the war hawk. Now the war hawk Netanyahu is telling the world that Israel's at war, and it seems like the international community is okay with them like absolutely coming off the chain and laying waste to anything remotely Palestinian. I think that this operation, the Afghan withdrawal, was set up so that when we left the $7 billion in munitions, weapons, and equipment, that it could be later dispersed among terrorist organizations so that when they were told to by U.S. intelligence agencies like the CIA or the DIA or you name it, that when they were given the high sign, they were going to be told to attack at these certain points and hit these certain targets, like a music festival, which, by the way, was completely unsecured, and they flew over the border fence between Israel and Gaza, which is one of the most patrolled borders in the world. And you want us to believe that this was just a massive intelligence failure. I don't believe that. I think the Israeli government with the U.S. government did this in concert. They either allowed this attack to happen or, worse yet, they orchestrated it. And they're willing to lose 500, 1,000, 2,000 Israeli citizens, a handful of American citizens, if it will get them a new war. And that's what you have to understand about these people in government. They would literally cut your throat and stand on your body to keep their shoes from getting wet. That's how they look at you. And they don't mind losing 1,000, 2,000 people if they believe they can survive the political blowback, if on the other side it gets them a war and it keeps them in power. And I think that the Ukraine war failing, McCarthy getting the boot, meant that, well, that show is over, here's the new show. And this is what countries that are losing their grasp do, is they lash out and they look for any attempt to exert influence. It's like, if you see a pride of lions, the king lion, the alpha lion, he doesn't have to attack anybody. He just walks around, sticks his chest out, lets his mane flow through the wind, and everybody makes way for him because they don't want to mess with him because he's the alpha. He's the king. It's the lion who doesn't appear to be the alpha anymore, who once was, who is getting older, maybe a little long in the tooth. Maybe he doesn't, walk as tall or hold his head up as high because he feels weakened. He feels as though he has to lash out to still prove himself to the younger lions because, well, my appearance isn't quite cutting it anymore. And that, unfortunately, is where the United States is at. We do not have this preeminence in the world as though we are the king lion, that this is our savannah. These lands are ours, and you will submit to what we decide, because if you don't, we will bear down on you and you will feel our wrath. But we don't have to, because you know what we're capable of. You can just see it. The world now is testing the United States and its abilities. Russia certainly did it in Ukraine, right? After the fall in Afghanistan, why wouldn't they? Israel now probably doesn't think the United States is going to have their back for much longer, so why not agree to this orchestrated attack on their people so that if the United States can no longer support them, well, at least we can take care of that pesky Palestinian problem. And now Israel will literally have, either by force or by suggestion, gotten rid of all the undesirable people. And that's just that's just the way it's going right now. So I want to read two articles that may explain why the Palestinians now feel like they have no other option, and why this war could possibly be the last one. And I mean that in the sense that there may be no stopping this. The United States will not be able to intervene and do anything about it. So this is from the website, the Institute for Middle East Understanding. And this is about Operation Cast Lead. And I'll read this. So on December 27th, 2008, Israel launched Operation Cast Lead, a massive 22-day military assault on the Gaza Strip. The ferocity of the attack was unprecedented in more than 6-decade-old conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, which killed more than 1,400 Palestinians, most of them civilians. In the aftermath, the UN appointed a fact-finding mission and found strong evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by both Israeli military and Palestinian militias. According to investigations by independent Israeli and Palestinian human rights organizations, between 1,385 and 1,419 Palestinians were killed during the Cast Lead, a majority of them civilians, including at least 308 minors under the age of 18. More than 5,000 more were wounded. 13 Israelis were also killed, including 3 civilians. Okay, so I didn't even know about this Operation Cast Lead until I heard about it on another YouTube channel. And this was during the last couple days of 2008. The United States is fully invested into the war on terror with Iraq and Afghanistan. It's probably why I missed it, is because this was barely even covered by Western media. But you can just see that right now, we're looking at these atrocities being committed against Israeli civilians, but I didn't realize that the UN is saying that Israel hammered Palestine for 22 some odd days, and there was up to 1,400 civilians killed during Operation Cast Lead, and 308 of them were minors. So 308 children died in that 22-day siege. Second article, 2014, about 7-8 years later, this is Operation Protective Edge from the same source. According to the United Nations, between July 7th and August 26, 2014, the Israeli military carried out more than 6,000 airstrikes on Gaza, an area roughly the size of Detroit, with 1.8 million people in the area, densely populated. The military fired 14,500 tank shells and approximately 35,000 artillery shells into Gaza. And there were 5,000 tons of munitions supplied to the attacking forces. According to the UN, between July and August of 2014, 2,251 Palestinians were killed in Gaza, including 1,462 civilians. The dead included 551 children and 299 women. Okay. Again, Operation Protective Edge. I had never heard of this before. This was not covered by Western media. Operation Cast Lead. I had no idea such a thing occurred. I mean, I knew there was obviously conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, but those are very concerning numbers, because when you look at the conflict now in 2023, you have to ask yourself, if you were Palestinian and you were raised in the Gaza Strip and you don't know any other way of living, and you see that the Israeli military, with the full support of the United States government, was shelling and bombing this little strip of land that you have the size of Detroit, like what option would you have left? Would you even want to go back to living in that little, strip of land, that prison? I'm not excusing what's being done to civilians in Israel right now, but I have to look at the situation as it is and say, when you give somebody nothing to lose, they will live and act as though they have nothing to lose. Why would they hold anything back? If you're going to die, if you're going to be forced to submit to that standard of living, well, maybe dying is a better outcome for you. And that's how bleak it is. And I hate to say this, but maybe Hamas instigated this knowing that it would get this reaction out of Israel and create an international outcry for some intervention. Now I see there's a story that Syria is actually firing missiles into Israel. You could see the Jordanians get involved. You could see Egypt get involved. You could even see Saudi Arabia get involved. You could see Iraq and Afghanistan opening up safe passage corridors to allow Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS affiliates, terrorists, to make their way from the east into the western parts of Israel. Israel could be besieged on all sides for this knee-jerk reaction. And the United States and the military-industrial complex that lurks within the halls of our government will come out the winner, because that conflict, as it goes and grows, will make them richer. And this is what I see going on. I don't think this stuff just happens in a vacuum. I think that this quote-unquote intelligence failure was not a failure at all. This was either allowed to happen or facilitated. And I mean, if Israelis need to ask themselves about Benjamin Netanyahu, either you believe his story and it was an intelligence failure, which means he's incompetent, or he allowed it to happen, which means he was a passive, force, as in allowing his country to be subject to attack, or worse yet, number 3, he allowed it to happen and helped organize the process in which it went down. And if that's the case, then you really have no other option but to remove him. I think you have no option but to remove him if any of those 3 is the answer. But right now, people just want revenge. People want blood for what they believe was their country, their people being attacked, whether they're on Palestinian or Israeli sides. But the United States now is going to insert itself once again into this conflict. It's going to wash its hands of Ukraine. And I think that there's a very good chance that the United States, because it's stretched itself so thin, we could see a move by China on Hong Kong and Taiwan. And the United States doesn't have the money, doesn't have the support from Congress, doesn't have the military bandwidth to address all these problems. If Russia-Ukraine is left to its own devices and we have to now go and aid Israel in this war, how can we possibly do 2 things at one time if China decides to move its forces and try to conquer Taiwan? And you could name off a dozen other places where conflicts could kick off. India and Pakistan. Like the list is quite long. And that's why we might see the BRICS coalition coming in and filling the void where the U.S. used to occupy and trying to keep the peace among its several nations in its coalition. And that will be the new multipolar world in the East, will be the BRICS. And NATO and the United States will just have to make do with what they have and understand that that portion of the world no longer wants to be under their hegemony. And as time goes on, United States will have less and less ability to lash out and start new conflicts and flex their muscles on parts of the world that just no longer want to be subject to Washington, D.C.'s whims. But that's just my opinion, right? If you disagree, that's what the comment section's for. I appreciate everybody coming back for this. This is strange. Like this last couple of weeks, I've really kind of scratched my head and tried to make sense of what's going on. This is the best I could come up with because, like, there's nothing new under the sun, right? These things just don't fall out of the sky. I mean, in this case, literally, guys were coming down from, like, you know, the sky in paragliders. But there is method to this, and I just can't help but think that the United States is starting a new conflict and joining it because the old conflict is not going to go the way they had foreseen. And the easiest way out is to start a new fire when the old fire that you started is starting to lose force. But we'll have to see how this goes. I don't want to take a side in this conflict because I don't feel like this is the United States' business anymore. These people aren't my people. I don't want my money going to fund their wars, to fund their feuds. And I definitely don't want to see American soldiers being sent to intervene on anyone's behalf. We've done that for far too long, and it's gotten us nothing but more enemies and more of our own soldiers maimed and killed. And I think I speak for a lot of Americans when I say we've seen enough of that. But anyway, I appreciate you tuning in. Give us a subscription if you haven't yet. I'm probably going to cover this for the next few weeks. We're also going to maybe talk about how the Ukraine war is proceeding. But I definitely wouldn't want to be in the country of Ukraine right now, knowing that the U.S. military, the support from the U.S. military and the aid that they were relying on is probably going to get turned off here in short order. Buckle up because this is going to be a bumpy ride. Anyway, once again, this is the Hoplite channel. I appreciate you watching, and take care.